What happens in an avoidance mind the moment you walk away is perhaps one of the most paradoxical psychological phenomena I've encountered in my years of studying human attachment. It's a theater of the absurd, really, where the protagonist simultaneously celebrates their freedom while mourning their loss, where victory tastes suspiciously like defeat, and where the very thing they thought they wanted becomes the thing they fear they've lost forever. Picture this scene, if you will. You've just closed the door behind you, your footsteps echoing down the hallway, and in that precise moment, that singular, crystalline instant, something remarkable happens in the avoidance mind. It's not relief, as you might expect. It's not the satisfied sigh of someone who has finally gotten what they wanted. No, it's something far more complex, far more tragic, and infinitely more human. It's as if someone has just handed them exactly what they asked for, only to watch their face fall when they realize they never truly wanted it at all. You see, the avoidant mind is a masterpiece of self-protection, evolved over years of learning that love hurts, that closeness burns, that vulnerability is a luxury they simply cannot afford. But here's the delicious irony. The very moment you remove the threat of intimacy by walking away, their mind begins to play the most elaborate trick on itself. Suddenly, the person who was pushing you away starts pulling you back, not with their actions, mind you, but with their thoughts, their regrets, their desperate internal monologue that sounds remarkably like someone who has just realized they've thrown away something precious. What you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you understand not just avoidant attachment, but the beautiful, maddening complexity of human connection itself. We'll explore the neurological theater that unfolds the moment you walk away, how something called negativity bias transforms their mental landscape into a gallery of missed opportunities and regret. We'll examine the empathy gap, that curious psychological blind spot that prevents them from truly understanding what they've lost until it's gone. And most importantly, we'll uncover why understanding this process isn't just academic curiosity. It's the key to either healing these relationships or freeing yourself from their gravitational pull. This matters because somewhere in your life, there's likely an avoidant who has left you bewildered, hurt, and wondering if you were ever truly seen or valued. Understanding what happens in their mind the moment you walk away isn't about excusing their behavior or giving you false hope. It's about giving you the clarity to make informed decisions about your own emotional future. Because the truth, as I've learned through decades of observation, is always more complex and more liberating than the stories we tell ourselves about why people leave. Let me tell you about Marcus, a brilliant architect who could design buildings that would stand for centuries, but couldn't construct a relationship that lasted more than 18 months. Marcus had perfected the art of the gradual exit, you know the type. He wouldn't slam doors or create dramatic scenes. Instead, he would slowly, methodically create distance. Longer silences during dinner conversations, sudden urgency about work projects that required solitary focus, a gradual cooling that felt like watching a fire die without anyone adding wood to keep it burning. Sarah, his partner of 14 months, had grown tired of competing with his emotional unavailability. She was a woman of substance, intelligent and self-aware enough to recognize when she was being slowly erased from someone's life. So one Thursday evening, after another dinner consumed in near silence while Marcus scrolled through architectural journals, she simply said, "I'm done, Marcus. I'm done trying to be in a relationship with someone who clearly doesn't want me here." She packed her things with quiet dignity, each folded sweater and collected book a small act of reclaiming herself. Marcus watched from the doorway, and I imagine he felt something like relief. The pressure was lifting. The expectation to be emotionally present, to share his inner world, to risk being truly known, all of it was walking out the door in a navy blue suitcase and a woman who deserved far more than he believed he could give. But then something extraordinary happened. The moment, and I mean the precise moment, Sarah's key turned in the lock from the outside, Marcus's mind began its transformation. It wasn't immediate relief that flooded his consciousness. Instead, it was as if someone had just turned on every light in a house he thought he wanted to keep dark. Suddenly, he could see Sarah everywhere. Not just her physical absence, the empty coffee cup that usually sat beside his, the silence where her laughter used to live, but her presence in every corner of his carefully constructed life. This is where our first psychological player enters the stage: negativity bias. You see, the human brain is evolutionarily wired to pay more attention to negative stimuli than positive ones. It's a survival mechanism that kept our ancestors alive when noticing the rustle in the bushes that might be a predator was more important than appreciating the sunset. But in Marcus's case, negativity bias began working overtime the moment Sarah left, highlighting every loss, every mistake, every moment of connection he had dismissed or taken for granted while she was present. Within hours, his mind had transformed into a museum of regret. He remembered the morning she made him laugh so hard that coffee came out of his nose, something he had barely acknowledged at the time because he was reading emails. He recalled the way she would absently run her fingers through his hair while they watched movies, a gesture he had found mildly annoying because it distracted him from the plot. Now, sitting in his perfectly quiet apartment, that memory felt like discovering a $20 bill in an old coat pocket, something valuable he had forgotten he possessed. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. And this is where our second psychological concept, the empathy gap, reveals its cruel efficiency. The empathy gap is our inability to predict how we'll feel in a different emotional state, or to accurately remember how we felt in the past. When Sarah was present, pressing for deeper connection, asking about his day, wanting to know his thoughts and fears, Marcus experienced what psychologists call hot state thinking. He was overwhelmed, suffocated, desperate for space. His brain in that state could not imagine ever wanting more closeness, more intimacy, more of Sarah's persistent, loving attention. But now, in what we might call a cold state, alone, calm, no longer feeling the pressure of her expectations, he literally could not access the memory of why he had needed her gone. It was as if his brain had performed selective surgery on his emotional memory. The suffocation was gone, but so was his ability to understand why he had felt suffocated in the first place. Instead, he could only access the loss, the absence, the growing realization that he had just let something irreplaceable slip through his fingers like sand. This is the cruel magic of the avoidant mind the moment you walk away. They don't just miss you, they miss a version of the relationship that perhaps never quite existed because they were too busy protecting themselves to fully experience it while it was happening. Marcus found himself remembering not the relationship he had actually lived with Sarah, but the relationship he might have had if he hadn't been so afraid of it. His mind began rewriting their history, not maliciously, but as a natural consequence of no longer feeling threatened by intimacy. When the threat is gone, the defense system powers down, and suddenly they can see clearly, but only after it's too late to act on that clarity. Now, if you find yourself on either side of this painful equation, there are specific practical steps you can take to navigate this psychological labyrinth. Let me share what I've learned about managing these dynamics, because understanding is only valuable if it leads to actionable wisdom. First, if you are the person walking away from an avoidant partner, you must understand the concept of emotional lag time. Their realization of what they've lost will not coincide with your departure. This isn't because they don't care, it's because their brain literally cannot process the loss while simultaneously managing the relief of reduced pressure. This lag time typically lasts anywhere from days to weeks, and during this period, you may receive confusing signals. They might reach out with seemingly casual messages, a forwarded article, a question about something you left behind, a sudden interest in your well-being. These are not necessarily manipulative tactics. They're often the first stirrings of their dawning awareness of what they've lost. Your response during this lag time is crucial. If your goal is to preserve your own emotional health and move forward, you must resist the temptation to interpret these reaches as genuine change or commitment to growth. Instead, maintain what I call compassionate boundaries. Acknowledge their communication if you choose to respond, but don't mistake their newfound clarity for their ability to sustain intimacy if you were to return. Remember, they're experiencing regret in a low-pressure environment. The moment you re-enter their life, the same avoidant mechanisms that drove you away will likely reactivate. However, if you genuinely believe the relationship has potential and you're willing to invest in a different approach, there's a specific framework that can help. It's called graduated re-engagement, and it requires tremendous patience and self-awareness. Instead of returning to the same dynamic that failed before, you would need to re-enter their life in a way that doesn't trigger their avoidant defenses. This means shorter interactions, less emotional intensity, and giving them space to come toward you rather than pursuing them. Think of it like rehabilitating an injured wild animal. Too much attention too quickly will cause them to retreat, but consistent, non-threatening presence might allow trust to rebuild gradually. The key here is managing your own expectations and emotional needs. Graduated re-engagement only works if you can genuinely be satisfied with slower progress and smaller gestures of intimacy. If you need deep emotional connection and consistent availability, which are perfectly reasonable needs, then attempting to slowly win back an avoidant partner will likely leave you feeling frustrated and unfulfilled. You must honestly assess whether you can find fulfillment in a relationship that may always require more space and independence than feels natural to you. For those who recognize themselves as the avoidant partner, the work is different but equally challenging. The first step is developing what I call real-time emotional awareness. Since your brain's default mode is to recognize the value of connection only after it's gone, you need to create systems that help you see and appreciate intimacy while you're experiencing it. This might involve daily check-ins with yourself about what you appreciated about your partner that day, or consciously noting moments of connection as they happen rather than dismissing them as clingy or overwhelming. One practical exercise is the appreciation pause. When your partner expresses affection, asks about your day, or seeks emotional connection, instead of immediately feeling suffocated or pulling away, pause for 10 seconds. In that pause, ask yourself, if this person were gone tomorrow, how would I feel about having dismissed this moment? It's a way of borrowing from your future regret to inform your present choices. This doesn't mean you have to become someone you're not, or force yourself into uncomfortable levels of intimacy, but it allows you to make more conscious choices about when to engage and when to create space. You also need to practice what I call transparent communication about your process. Instead of pulling away without explanation, learn to say things like, "I'm feeling overwhelmed right now and need some space. But I want you to know, it's not about you or our relationship. Can we reconnect in a few hours?" This gives your partner context for your behavior and prevents them from filling the silence with their own fears and interpretations. It's the difference between disappearing mysteriously and taking a transparent break. Perhaps most importantly, you need to develop tolerance for what feels like emotional vulnerability, but is actually emotional intimacy. Much of what avoidant individuals experience as suffocating or overwhelming is simply the normal level of emotional exchange that healthy relationships require. Building this tolerance is like building physical strength. It requires consistent, gradual practice. Start with small acts of emotional sharing or availability and gradually increase your capacity over time. The goal isn't to become someone who loves constant togetherness, but to expand your comfort zone enough to sustain a meaningful connection. What we've explored today reveals something profound about the architecture of human connection, that our capacity to love and be loved is often hamstrung not by lack of feeling, but by the very mechanisms we've developed to protect those feelings. The avoidant mind's response to your walking away is not evidence of their coldness or lack of caring. It's evidence of a psychological system so sophisticated in its self-protection that it can make someone push away exactly what they most deeply need. Understanding what happens in an avoidance mind the moment you walk away should not fill you with false hope or convince you to stay in relationships that consistently leave you feeling unseen and unvalued. Instead, it should give you the clarity to make decisions based on reality rather than mystery. When someone shows you through their actions that they cannot sustain intimacy, believe them. When someone creates distance every time you move closer, trust that pattern. Your understanding of their internal struggle should inform your compassion, not your strategy for winning them back. But here's what I want you to carry forward from our time together today. Every human being, regardless of their attachment style, is doing their best with the emotional tools they developed to survive their particular history. The avoidant person in your life isn't withholding love to hurt you. They're managing their own deep fear of being hurt. This doesn't make their behavior acceptable or sustainable in a relationship, but it makes it understandable. And understanding, as I've found, is the first step toward either healing or letting go. If you are someone who loves an avoidant person, your task is not to fix them or wait for them to realize your worth after you're gone. Your task is to love yourself enough to require the kind of presence and emotional availability that you deserve. Sometimes, paradoxically, the most loving thing you can do for someone who cannot sustain intimacy is to stop trying to make them. Your walking away might indeed trigger their recognition of what they've lost, but that recognition alone is not enough to rebuild the foundation of trust and safety that healthy love requires. And if you recognize yourself in the patterns we've discussed today, if you see your own mind's tendency to appreciate love only in retrospect, then your journey toward healthier connection begins with a simple but profound commitment to practice staying present for love while it's being offered to you. Not every gesture of affection is a threat to your autonomy. Not every invitation to deeper connection is a trap. Sometimes love is simply love. Imperfect, persistent, and worthy of being received with an open heart. The moment you walk away will always reveal something true about both the person leaving and the person left behind. Make sure that truth serves your growth, your healing, and your capacity to build the kind of love that doesn't require anyone to leave in order to be fully appreciated.
If you believe this video might help someone dear to you, share it with them. A small gesture on your part could mean the world to a friend in need.